Universals? What the hell are those? Well, let's find out. Wikipedia says, the problem of universals is an ancient question from metaphysics which has inspired a range of philosophical topics and disputes. Should the properties an object has in common with other objects, such as color and shape, be considered to exist beyond those objects? And if a property exists separately from objects, what is the nature of that existence? Plato divided reality into two: the higher world of universals, forms, ideas, and the lower world of particulars, perceivable, material objects. The higher world was the truer, more real world, and the lower world a derivative, dependent world, a mere copy or shadow of the real world. We can reframe this in terms of concepts versus percepts, thinking versus sensing. For Plato, true reality was conceptual, intellectual, concerned with thinking, and apprehended via thinking, reason, logic and intellectual intuition. It was all about the operations of the highest part of the soul, the rational part. Less real reality, material reality, was concerned with the senses. It was about the lower aspects of the soul, the animalistic parts, the emotional and appetitive parts. In Platonist terms, science is a lower discipline, and mathematics and metaphysics higher and more real disciplines. Modern science is highly anti-Platonist and says that matter is the most real thing and is apprehended by the senses. Mathematics and metaphysics are dismissed as unreal, man-made abstractions. Science never attempts to explain how real matter, devoid of life, mind and purpose, can produce unreal mathematics and metaphysics. How can unreal things exist in a world made only of real matter? In a world of mind, by contrast, true mind can, via its mental operations, create false beliefs, opinions and perceptions. This is because thoughts are dual-aspect entities of form and content. The syntax, the form, of thought is always true. The semantics, the content, of thought is true to the extent that it reflects syntax and false to the extent that it has its own experiential features which can explore subjective feelings, opinions, beliefs, and mysticism. Human beings can have thoughts which have no connection whatsoever to the exploration of the syntax of reality, and these thoughts can veer off into the wildest religions, spiritual systems, sciences, philosophies, conspiracy theories, and so on. They are pure mythos, and nothing to do with logos. Mind, as part of its fundamental nature, has the capacity to produce delusion. Scientific matter does not. It's impossible to get from a true entity, such as matter supposedly is, to crazy religions, spiritual systems, sciences, philosophies, conspiracy theories, and so on. If matter is true, it cannot produce falsehood. Mind, by contrast, is syntactically true but has another aspect, the subjective, experiential, semantic aspect, which is not rational, logical, or analytic, and therefore can generate irrational, illogical and wholly unanalytic belief systems. Mind can, and does, produce semantic falsehood, though it is absolutely incapable of producing syntactic falsehood, i.e., mathematical calculations can never be wrong, but that does not mean that they cannot produce absurd answers if they are not concerned with syntax but are instead concerned with semantics, hence emotions, perceptions, intuitions, beliefs, opinions, and so on. The very fact that the false beliefs about reality exist is incontestable proof that reality is mental and not material. Matter cannot produce false beliefs. It doesn't have any capacity to do so. Mind can. Just look around at the human race. Matter cannot produce false minds, minds which generate false beliefs, hence reality cannot be material. This is an absolutely critical point which no scientist ever has, or ever could, address. Science itself has all manner of totally false beliefs. It claims that existence can randomly come from non-existence, a logical impossibility, that mindless matter can create minds with false beliefs, a logical impossibility, that material objects can create mental subjects, a logical impossibility, that unfree matter can create the reality or delusion of free will, a logical impossibility, that randomness can produce order, a logical impossibility, and so on. For Plato, you can have knowledge of universals, but only opinions and beliefs about particulars. This is an essential point to understand. Knowledge concerns universals, and these are not particular sensory observables, and therefore cannot be accessed by science. It's impossible to have knowledge without universals. Since science is based on sensory observables, how does it create knowledge? It does it via a trick. It introduces mathematical universals into science, while claiming that these are unreal, man-made abstractions. Hence, in science, knowledge itself is unreal, man-made and abstract. Science never discusses these issues. No one in science is qualified to do so. And no one in science cares. Plato asserted that it was impossible to have knowledge of anything that could change or was particular or was imperfect. Real knowledge concerned immutable, perfect, eternal and necessary universals. The temporal and contingent were mired in error. For Plato, knowledge had to be forever unfailing, i.e., it could never go wrong, hence could never change. The world of the universals, Plato said, is the real world. The world of particulars is imperfect, only partially real, a shadowy world providing an inadequate simulation of the real world. So, Platonic realism concerns the reality of universals, not the reality of material particulars. Scientific realism, by contrast, concerns the reality of particular materials, not the reality of mathematical universals, which are in fact deemed unreal. For Plato, the eternal forms, universals, are not mental artifacts, but exist in their own right, as absolute entities. Successors of Plato relocated the universals into the mind of God. We might think of Plato's universals as freestanding mental entities, they do not require a mind to host them. Others decided that these universals must exist in a perfect mind, and the only perfect mind that could host them was of course God's. In fact, the real universals are those of ontological mathematics, and they don't exist in minds, or outside minds. Instead, they are minds. The master universal is the God equation, and it defines each and every monadic mind. The collection of all monadic minds is God, and creates everything else. God creates the world out of itself, out of its own constituent minds, its own constituent thoughts. Think of God as a super being made of cells, units. Each of these cell units is an autonomous mind, capable of independent action. What makes God so astounding is that God is not made of material cells, as human bodies are, but of mental cells, minds, each with its own subjectivity and free will. Can you imagine how different you would be if the trillions of cells in your body were individual entities, capable of autonomous action? Each of us is an individual, autonomous mind. God is the collection of all such minds, and the collection of all minds is everything. It's the author of everything, including the physical universe studied by science. But science literally has no clue that the physical universe is made by minds, not matter, and matter is actually mental stuff. Matter is made of sinusoidal waves, which are basis thoughts. Science is slowly inching towards the right answer with its notion of strings, but it would never take the ultimate step and convert non-analytic energy strings into analytic energy sinusoids and locate them inside minds, as the fundamental constituents of dimensionless minds. Scientists would under no circumstances define strings in a mental rather than material way, because of their unshakable materialist faith. Some scientists, such as Nobel laureate Werner Heisenberg, have flirted with a Platonist worldview. Heisenberg said, "I think that modern physics has definitely decided in favor of Plato. In fact, the smallest units of matter are not physical objects in the ordinary sense, they are forms, ideas which can be expressed unambiguously only in mathematical language." This is getting incredibly close to ontological mathematics. The smallest units of matter are actually mental sinusoids, pure Platonist forms, eternal, immutable, perfect, and pure, absolute knowledge, which are immaterial and outside space and time, exactly as required by Plato. Aristotle, Plato's star student, had a different take on Plato's forms. Aristotle converted them into formal causes and located them inside actual objects in the world. For Plato, forms were outside space and time. For Aristotle, they were inside space and time, inside matter. In Aristotle's system, only God, pure form, matterless form, was outside space and time and had nothing to do with space, time and matter, nothing at all. In Plato's system, a superbeing called the demiurge, the public worker, the creator of the shared universe, used the forms as blueprints for all the objects in the world, and shaped the world by applying forms to matter. In Aristotle's system, God ignored the world, didn't interact with the world at all, and thought only of his own perfection. The world thought of God, however, and wanted to move towards him, to get as close as possible. Roman Catholic Christianity was in a sense a combination of Plato's demiurge, with the forms relocated into the demiurge's mind, and Aristotle's God, a perfect, transcendent, immaterial being outside space and time. The Christian God created the world out of nothing and was separate from creation, yet present everywhere in creation. St. Augustine emphasized Platonist and Neoplatonist philosophy. St. Thomas Aquinas emphasized Aristotelian philosophy. Protestantism jettisoned all of this, regarding it all as pagan. Roman Catholicism could easily be saved by ditching Jesus Christ and converting it into Greek philosophy, into rationalism. Protestantism cannot be saved. It's the devil's religion, the religion of pure faith. Faith is the devil's whore. Faith is the greatest source of lies, delusion, and deception ever devised. To understand how different systems understood the relationship between universals, forms, and particulars, matter, let's consider how they would explain a horse. How would a horse be created in Plato's system? Plato's demiurge would take the horse blueprint, form, universal, and apply it to some matter in space and time, and then give it a soul, the form of life, to animate it. How would a horse be created in Aristotle's system? The horse form would naturally animate a particular parcel of matter in space and time. Neither Plato nor Aristotle actually explained how form and matter could coexist and interact. This same problem became much more clearly specified by Descartes with his unextended mind, form, and extended matter. It's a problem which remains to this day in science. How can material atoms obey mathematical formulae unless these formulae exist in matter and control matter? But science denies the reality of mathematics, so it has made this impossible. Science doesn't believe in dualism, and yet it is a dualism. It's a dualism of real matter and unreal mathematics. Science pretends to be a materialist monism, while totally ignoring its reliance on mathematics, the only thing which makes science an intelligible subject, and which is regarded as immaterial, and hence not real, just as mind is formally unreal in science. How would a horse be created in science? According to science, materialist, randomist, Darwinian evolution produces horses and they are animated by their particular organization of matter. For science, life is not something added to matter or external to matter. Rather, life and mind are properties of the organization of the matter within a horse, hence a wholly material in origin. How would a horse be created in Christianity? God created the original horses and animated them. Animals in Christianity do not have rational, moral, immortal souls. They have mortal, immoral, animal souls, and when they have offspring, they physically pass on the elements needed to animate them. They have no independent spiritual component, nothing that can enter the afterlife. For Plato, things needed to partake of the form of life to be alive. For Aristotle, any living thing had a form which included the property of life. For scientists, the organization of specific matter in a living body is what provides life. In Greek philosophy, forms are the blueprints, archetypes or essences of individual things. They are the intelligible part of things. In science, nothing has any intelligible component. Forms don't exist in science. Intelligibility, such as it is in science, is supplied by mathematics, but mathematics is of course unreal according to science, meaning that scientific intelligibility is unreal too. Every system of knowledge requires an intelligible component, although the idea of intelligibility is typically stretched beyond breaking. Greek philosophy discussed intelligibility via forms. Science discusses it via mathematics. For the Greeks, forms were real. For scientists, mathematics is not real. For Abrahamism, God is intelligibility, although the Abrahamic God is not itself an intelligible concept. For Eastern mysticism, non-duality, bare awareness, cosmic consciousness, or the oneness, is the intelligible aspect, although of course none of these is actually intelligible. For love and lighters, love is the intelligible aspect of reality, even though love is an emotion, not anything that furnishes intelligibility. You can't explain ontology and epistemology using emotion. Scientific matter is not intelligible. Matter doesn't explain anything in science. Only mathematics does. Philosophical form is intelligible only in a highly artificial way. Mathematics is the sole inherently intelligible subject. For everything to be intelligible, everything needs to be made of mathematics, and, of course, everything is. Plato tried to make forms intelligible via geometrical arguments, which is why he inscribed over the door to his academy, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here." Aristotle was much less mathematical than Plato. He preferred biology and nature. He was more inclined to empiricism than rationalism. Science is in one sense extreme Aristotelianism, where all metaphysics has been removed, and in one sense extreme Platonism since it's so mathematical, and yet the reality of mathematics is denied. Plato's worldview was highly conceptual. Aristotle's worldview was enormously more perceptual. Aristotle's system was referred to as hylomorphism. Encyclopaedia Britannica says, hylomorphism, from Greek hyl, matter, morph, form, is, in philosophy, the metaphysical view according to which every natural body consists of two intrinsic principles, one potential, namely, primary matter, and one actual, namely, substantial form. It was the central doctrine of Aristotle's philosophy of nature. Hylomorphism supplies an intelligible component, form, and a perceptual component, matter. Science has a perceptual component, matter, and an intelligible component, mathematics, so could be called hylomathematics. Philosophical form is non-quantitative and non-analyzable, hence useless to science. Mathematics is both quantitative and analyzable, hence cures the defects of form. In ontological mathematics, hyl, matter, is reduced to pure mathematics, hence there is no further need for science. Mathematics explains everything. Encyclopaedia Britannica says, before Aristotle, the Ionian philosophers had sought the basic constituents of bodies, but Aristotle observed that it was necessary to distinguish two types of principles. On the one hand, one must look for the primordial elements, i.e., for bodies that are not derived from others and of which all other bodies are composed. He found his solution to this question in Empedocles' doctrine of the four elements, earth, water, air, and fire. On the other hand, one must look for the intrinsic conditions whereby a body is or comes to be what it is understood to be, and to answer this question he proposed his hylomorphic doctrine. Observable matter does not explain itself. You could look at the world forever and never come to any understanding of what it is. Intelligibility is unobservable. You have to work out why things as are they are. You don't use your senses, you use reason and logic. You use thinking rather than sensing. You use concepts rather than percepts. Plato and Aristotle added intelligibility via form. Science adds intelligibility via mathematics. Animals have no knowledge and understanding of reality because they are stuck with their senses. They are unable to add an unobservable, intelligible layer to reality, a level at which observable particulars can be seen to be expressions of unseen universals. Science adds this layer via mathematics, while rejecting mathematics as a real thing, a position that makes no sense at all and is wholly opposed to realism. The problem, of course, is that scientists ideologically only regard phenomenal percepts as real and completely dismiss the reality of noumenal concepts. They do not accept the reality of the intelligible order of existence. It cannot be stressed enough that what makes reality intelligible cannot be observed, hence is non-scientific. No scientific experiment can reveal intelligibility. Science can only reveal observable patterns, and these observable patterns are then universalized via mathematics. Mathematics furnishes all of science's intelligibility, while having its reality rejected. Not one scientist has found this problematic, i.e., not one scientist has ever been troubled by the fact that science regards intelligibility as fictitious. Scientific facts concern observability alone. The intelligible layer of reality is unobservable, hence cannot constitute scientific fact. The observable data of an experiment will never change, but the interpretation of the data can change endlessly, i.e., new theories can be produced to offer a different account of the intelligibility of what is happening. Science was once deterministic, now it's largely indeterministic. Science was once about causation, now it's largely about randomness, statistics, probabilism. Newtonian physics was replaced by Einsteinian physics. Quantum mechanics offers a different account of reality from Einstein's general relativity. String theory, M-theory, and loop quantum gravity all say different things. Science is unable to settle on a definitive account of what makes reality intelligible. It doesn't have the vaguest idea of how to approach a definitive treatment of intelligibility, because that's not its thing. That exercise smacks of philosophy, and scientists are repulsed by philosophy and reject it. Ontological mathematics, by complete contrast, is all about finding the definitive intelligibility associated with the principle of sufficient reason and Occam's razor, which is to say it is concerned with finding the maximally rational and simple universals which must underlie and explain everything. The answer to this search is the sinusoidal wave, which can be expressed via countless different frequencies, wavelengths, amplitudes and phases, while always retaining the same universal nature. The sinusoidal wave is infinitely protean. We can adjust collections of sinusoids to fit any pattern we like, i.e., sinusoidal waves are the best universal building blocks you could ever have, which is precisely why they are the universal building blocks. Basis sinusoids are basis thoughts, and just look at how infinitely changeable your thoughts are. Basis sinusoids, thoughts, are organized monadically, i.e., one monadic mind comprises a full set of basis sinusoids, sufficient to allow every mind to perform on its own all the operations of ontological Fourier mathematics, connecting the frequency domain of mind to the spacetime domain of matter. Ontological Fourier mathematics is what thinking actually is, i.e., thinking is exclusively a set of mathematical operations proceeding by way of the two interconnected domains of frequency and spacetime, of concepts and percepts, of syntax and semantics, of noumena and phenomena, of the intelligible and sensible, of information carrier and information carried, of map and territory, of signifier and signified, of rational and empirical. Sinusoids, thoughts, are perfectly definable, quantitative and analyzable, hence are the perfect components of a universal system of definitive knowledge. Encyclopaedia Britannica says, the primordial elements, in Aristotle's system, correspond in a sense to those of modern physics insofar as the single elements can have independent existence or activity of their own, and can therefore be known directly by way of experiment. Matter and form, however, are not bodies or physical entities that can exist or act independently, they exist and act only within and by the composite. Thus, they can be known only indirectly, by intellectual analysis, as the metaphysical principles of bodies. Science of course dismisses all reference to metaphysics. It's only interested in physics, even though physics is unintelligible without metaphysics, that which explains physics. Science, because it is empirical, sensory, rather than rational, concerned with thinking, has never come to terms with intelligibility. Encyclopaedia Britannica says, Aristotle based his argument chiefly on the analysis of becoming, or substantial change. If a being changes into another being, something permanent must exist that is common to the two terms, otherwise there would be no transformation but merely a succession by the annihilation of the first term and the creation of the second. This permanent and common something cannot itself be strictly a being because a being already is and does not become, and because a being in act cannot be an intrinsic part of a being possessing a unity of its own, it must therefore be a being in potency, a potential principle, passive and indeterminate. At the same time, in the two terms of the change, there must also be an actual, active, determining principle. The potential principle is matter, the actual principle, form. In ontological mathematics, form, the actuality principle, equates to syntax, while matter, the passive and indeterminate principle, equates to semantics, the subjectively experienced aspect of reality. The actuality principle is quantitative, the potentiality principle is qualitative. Encyclopaedia Britannica says, opposed to hylomorphism are atomism, mechanism, and dynamism, all of which deny the intrinsic composition of metaphysical principles in bodies and recognize only physical principles, such as corpuscles, pure mathematical extension, or forces and energies. Ontological mathematics reduces all such considerations to purely mathematical considerations, leaving nothing but a universal mathematical monism, proceeding by way of monadic minds made of basis thoughts, sinusoids.